Welcome to Community Cuts. Brooklyn is in the house tonight. We're hosted by Salon Leahine, 732 Washington Avenue between Prospect Place and Park Place. If you're looking for professional barbers, professional hairstylists, you need to stop in 732 Washington Avenue. Well, we're going to be talking about Brooklynnites are going to be talking about the election that we had on Tuesday. Mm-hmm. We're going to unpack this election, whether you're in Crown Heights, Brooklyn Hills, Brooklyn Heights, Prospect Heights, Park Slope, wherever. We're going to unpack this.
Mm-hmm. So I just think we're going to just introduce ourselves. So my name is Sharon Wedderburn. I am presently a Crown Heights resident. I had been a long-term resident of Prospect Heights.
Hi, my name is Melissa, and I live with my family in Clinton Hill. And before that, we were living in Cobble Hill. We like the hills.
Good evening. My name is Mr. Ricky T. James. I'm an associate architect. I'm a preservationalist. I am a member of PAPA, a political organization inside of Clinton Hills, where I do live.
Okay. My name is Christian Baxter. I am a long-term resident of Clinton Hill myself. I have family who has spanned on different kinds of committees and community activism. And I have too many friends, too many close whomever you name it, who've just been so connected and infused into the roots of the city that I think it's almost necessary to lay mention or have some kind of connection. So again, Christian Baxter.
So here's the thing that's interesting. You know, we talk about the elections, and the one thing about this election as to the prior presidential election is that we knew the results much sooner than we did the last time. Mm-hmm. I think in the last election cycle, we did not find out who won the presidency until Saturday, and pretty much early Wednesday morning, we knew that Trump was going to return to the White House. The interesting thing is that I was talking to someone today in a hair salon, and what she told me was that her neighborhood was very quiet that night, so she thought something was amiss. She lives in Park Slope, and they're very engaged. That's one of the sectors in the community, in the Brooklyn community, that's really engaged. And it was quiet, so people were watchful and waiting to see what was going on because it wasn't their expectation that it wouldn't be as lively. It was as decisive as it was. What did you find?
In terms of
just in terms of expectations, just in terms of how people were reacting to it, were people focusing on the election or were they avoiding? Because I know somebody was totally, don't tell me anything about the news. I'll find out tomorrow.
I was just sitting, in my family room watching, texting with friends, and some went to sleep early. I actually stayed up till 1:30. I stayed up until they called Pennsylvania. And then once they called Pennsylvania, I was like, okay, I'm going to bed because it was pretty much, there was no way that, there was no path for Harris to get to the number that she needed once President-elect Trump won Pennsylvania. But I have to say that I'm not that shocked by the results. I've been following the election since, day one, the campaigning, and, you hear about, how people are just having it very rough. And people, they felt left behind, whether it's economically or because of the migrant crisis. I was following, what's going on in Chicago with the African-American community in Chicago. They, have been very angry and very vocal, and they really felt left behind. And this one woman, she was at a community meeting, and I don't know if she was yelling at Mayor Johnson, but she's like, we're going to go red. We're going to go red, because they were not getting what they needed from the politicians. And I think just based on how people voted, I think most of the country felt that way. I know I definitely felt that way. And, I have a very good life, but I felt, there were some things going on in this country that I was not getting what I needed from the federal government. And I'll just stop there for now.
Okay. I'm just curious on the statement. A statement that says that somehow we were able to get the votes faster this time when we were forced. We had asked for, before 2020, if we could start tallying votes before, once we started getting the absentee ballots, once we started to get everything mailed in, we asked before, and the Republicans pushed and said, no, you have to wait until the day of election to start counting. But magically, we were able to get all of these numbers so fast that we've never been able to get numbers so fast before. So you start to asking questions of wondering how all the red states managed to get all of their numbers in so much faster than they ever have before, when we've been talking about voting suppression. We've been talking about ballots missing. We've been talking about these things for too many years. When are we going to protect our own votes? When are we going to, even New York, we're saying that absentee ballots, people aren't even receiving. So now I can imagine in red towns, if they know you're blue, did your vote magically not make it to you? So you were forced to do an affidavit? Did your votes magically not get out of the election site? When are we going to start asking the questions? And I see that there's somehow this fear that we can demand from red what they can demand from us. Red has no problem saying whatever they want to say. They did it for 4 years. They have no problem even when we're in control of saying what they want to say. But somehow blue, we're like, well, let them talk because we're going to be neutral. Let them talk. We're going to be passive. And I'm missing, when are the pages out of the book are so torn out that you don't have anything until you don't have anything. And now you're up. You can't be upset. There's no room to be upset. You didn't want it when you had it. So I'm going to just pass it for that one moment.
Thank you, Christian. Issue, I was a poll worker during this election. I was a poll worker during the first election of Trump. The first election of Trump, whoever he was running against at that time came into my poll worker site and tore up everything and pulled out ballots and ran out of the election. It was, believe me, it was horrible. And they threw the ballots out into the middle of the street.
Wow.
This time it was all Kamala Harris's people who wanted her elected. I can understand that they were inside of the poll worker site, and it was so quiet. So about 500 people exactly quietly standing there waiting for the issue of when someone to do something. And it was just a standstill. I have a book, The Moral Compass of Politicians. What is it that they follow? The book is a bestseller. Is what the political individuals go by during the years in the 90s. Is it still the same? That's all I'm asking.
So now, with posing a question to go further, with recognizing if we're not going to be willing to protect our own constituency, if we're not going to be willing to go the extreme, the extra mile, if it's becoming, we're getting to the point that even on the ballot, you have blue candidates running as both Democrat and conservative. Like, what kind of math? Like, when are we just running to see who can be redder? Like, if both parties are just red and just if that's point, just you have to say this. But my truest fear about all of this is, what are we saying to our youth? At one point, we're saying, this is the joke that the news had put. Oh, it's because of the males, specifically black males. Now, when you look at the because now thank God that Facebook and Instagram started putting out different percentages and scopes, because it was 55% white male. I'm sorry, 55% white that was, and that 55% carried with the majority of his vote. So that in itself, 90 was up to 89% black carried for Kamala Harris. So those few black males that actually might have voted for Trump were in nowhere near the drop in the bucket, like in comparison to all of, matter of fact, white women was a huge number for Trump as well. Like, we're not discussing, I mean, a lot of the, did we go for the Hispanic vote? Did we try? Did we go for the Asian, understand Asian and the Indian vote? Are we even trying to understand the different cultures in the communities? What about the LGBT vote, which is heavily blue, very blue, but we're not even trying to respect their rights when we were blue. So now that it's red, like, are we going to even, when are we, communities? There are more people at stake at this very moment in time as this is rolling out these 2 months than anything. Women in general, do you know, like, it doesn't stop with like the body. It stops with affirmative action help more white women than any other group, period. So when we start to attack literally everything of anything that's not white male, you have to start asking questions, folks. Come on, it's bigger than this. I'm sorry, moving on.
So one of the things that, is really clear is that we, people have different constituencies, or people presume that you have a particular point of view based upon your ethnicity, based upon your socioeconomic class, based upon your education. And I mean, we all live in communities, and it just says how separate we are rather than working together. Melissa and I were talking earlier about, living in a community and being able to, learn things from one another. But if we don't have a common goal, because politics are local, and seeing something like the migrant crisis come to Clinton Hill really made it real as to some of the challenges that people would be able to not pay that much attention to, right? And if you look at Brooklyn, because I refer to Brooklyn as the center of the universe, there's so many American families that their first step in this country was to be in Brooklyn, all ethnicities, right? And to understand that you have to be able to, for you to be able to move along towards the American dream, just even to establish yourself, it has to be a cooperative or collaborative process where not everybody is holding all the resources. So is it a resource thing? Is it a stereotype thing? Is it an access thing? Is it a perception thing? Because, as Christian said, the media really, depending on what you watch, you can watch, for me, 23 and watch MSNBC and watch the same particular news action item on Newsmax. And you're wondering, are we looking at the same thing? The commentary is so different. I mean, it's like, are we watching the same thing? Even, the use of religion, because, there's this move towards Christian nationalism, and you're using religion. I'm like, are we reading the same Bible? And I know they're different versions of the Bible, but, even if we're looking at the same, what is our interpretation? Is it colored by our experience? Is it colored that people like the Bible is the word of God, case closed? Are you reading the snippets that you only want to apply? Because it goes back to what Ricky was saying. Where is your moral core? What is our moral core? What is our obligations of citizens of the United States as human beings, as neighbors? Who do we need to provide for? Because everybody needs to eat. I don't think in the last couple of years, I remember when eggs got so expensive, it was like, say what now? A dozen eggs is $5. And then you go to, which was perverse in New York City, the least expensive place to buy eggs, ready for this, guys, was Whole Foods, right? I'm like, I don't know what Whole Foods source is, but they're cheaper. They're cheaper than going to Wegmans. They're cheaper than going to Stop and Shop. And I remember sharing this with one of my friends, and we're on a time crunch. It's like, I can't believe that I am going into Whole Foods specifically to buy eggs, which is a basic, So, you look at those things, but it's when you start searching out for these things, you walk out of a supermarket and you've just spent $40 and it's as heavy as my purse, right? There's 6 or 7 items. And when you're including protein, it's like, what's the source for a food? What's going on? Because the supply chain, post pandemic really bumped up the price of food. So did that ever get back to normal, or are we seeing inflationary forces? And given what was said on the campaign trail, I'm really concerned about prices of a whole bunch of things. Because one of the things that we learned in the pandemic is that America doesn't manufacture so much of the stuff that we need. We weren't able to get masks because the masks were manufactured in China. So we had to get the masks that we needed to keep ourselves safe to be imported. So we're talking about tariffs. And one of the things that, because, we are society by experience, by education, by exposure, right? And did you understand that a tariff means that the company in the United States that is buying the raw product that's no longer manufactured in the United States is paying the extra price? It's not the foreigner, the foreign country, the foreign entity that's producing it. And when you look in the Midwest, and this started out in the Reagan era, the full out rusting of the Midwest, because the Midwest was center for manufacturing, and it became really cheaper to manufacture steel, for example, something that you need for building outside of the country. So when you go to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which is, the heart of Bethlehem steel,
Right.
and you had all of these big cokers and cookers, and, this was mighty industry. You go there now, you see the hulk of once what was, right?
Mhm.
And the largest source of jobs is a casino. The wages that you earn in a casino are not plentiful nor comparable to what you need to be able to provide for a family. So that whole thing about feeling and falling behind, it's actually there. Because if you can't, talking about living in New York City, they have something called an affordable housing lottery, and it's based upon the average median income. Sounds like it should be fair. You make less money, their preferences, you make more money, you have access to, newly built rent stabilized housing. And what the rent stabilized housing means is that you're not going to be subject to enormous, increases in your rent when you have renewals, and you have certain protections based upon the fact that you're holding that lease, right? But what's happened in our communities is that the average median income, as people have discovered the magic that is Brooklyn, right? People are moving in here in droves, and they're moving here making salaries that are higher than the municipal workers that keep the city moving. So somebody that's making a salary of $60,000 a year, according to ANHD, American Neighborhood Housing Development, right? $60,000 a year for a family of 4 is now considered low income.
Yes, it is.
Right? And $60,000 a year used to be a good salary for a municipal worker, because
I
at
was
the
there
end of a
yesterday.
term of service, they're going to be able to get a pension out of that. And that was the scheme for a lot of people. That was the route to the middle class, right? So when you see that the people that work in the city can't afford to stay in the city, and how many of us know teachers that live in Jersey, right? That have gone to Staten Island, even though Staten Island is part of New York City. Some of us in Brooklyn think that it's foreign, right?
Mhm.
Or they
You
go
go there.
they go deep into, up north, which for us, deep up north means Dutchess County, right? So you have the commute times, we're very city centric, right? And, so, you have all of those people, essential workers that you need, right? And they have to drive into the city. And this collides with people who are more recent residents of New York City that say you don't need a car, right? So if you have the teacher or the principal of the school, because school closure is not based upon whether or not the children can go to school, and there's no such thing as a snow day post-pandemic because we have remote learning, right? It's based on whether the staff will be able to get it. And when you have teachers that have bought homes in the Poconos and have that hour and a half commute on a bad snow day, it's safer to keep the schools closed. So what are we saying? We're not providing for our needs essentially. And that's the part of, falling behind, because people make the decisions to stay in the city. And actually what's happened is there's no housing ladder anymore, right? You used to be able to start off as a young couple in a 1-bedroom apartment, and then your family gets larger and you might get a 2-bedroom apartment. Then it's like, wait, we have another kid. Maybe we should buy a house. And you could actually do this on one income. I mean, I know that was the story for my family, right? That they were able to do it on one income. Now, Melissa and I were talking earlier, a fixer upper in central Brooklyn is $1 million, right? And to save for that down payment, that average family will have to save 20 or 25 years to have that down payment money, right? And then the other thing is you look at affordability. So someone who makes about $60,000 a year, an affordable apartment is maybe $1,200 or $1,300 a month. Please show me one that's newly on the market. I don't think that exists, So, you look at that, why people feel left behind, because not only are you shopping carefully, you're shopping carefully with coupons, right? And you still don't feel that you're providing for your family or being able to access the great things. There was a lot of controversy when they built the Barclays Center, right? And we have two sports teams. We have a WNBA team and an NBA team. The New York Liberty brought a basketball championship to New York City. Hasn't happened since 1973. But based upon their success, right, in the last couple of years, guess what? Ticket prices have gone up, right? And when ticket prices go up, is this an outing for the family? No. Much like how when movie tickets went up, people started buying DVRs, right? So to be able to take a family of 4 out, right? So you have two adults paying $36 and a child. So you're paying more $60 to get into the movie theater. Then you got to buy the stuff, right? So that becomes $100 outing for a family. Isn't it easier? Isn't it more economically feasible for them to do it at home? But then you lose the businesses because movie theaters are shuttered. Remember, at one point we had movie theaters all along Flatbush Avenue. We had movies at one end of Flatbush Avenue at Kings Plaza. We had a couple of theaters downtown Brooklyn, right? So those smaller theaters closed down. They became churches. They were repurposed into other retail uses. And what's happened now, the Court Suite theaters post-pandemic, because nobody was going to the movie theaters, has closed. The Barnes and Nobles has relocated to another building. I suspect a lot of it had to do with the cost of lease renewal. But now you have prime property on Court Street, right? What does that become? Does that become, because we don't know if there's any restriction in their deed that it has to be used for entertainment, or can this be something that can be converted into, wait for it, more luxury housing that people can't afford? And those are the kinds of things, because we can't build ourselves out of this crisis. We absolutely can't build ourselves out of the crisis. But how do we match the prices that we need for families to be able to afford with salaries? How do we do that? And we talk about different levels of government. So people that, sit in the city council actually hear it from the constituents in terms of many are facing eviction or need rental assistance to maintain their place in their home, right? Then you have this tremendous homelessness crisis where many people that are in family shelters actually have jobs. They just don't have a place to live. So is that the path for an affordable apartment? And how is that disruptive to a family? Then when you propose building projects where people's income actually match the rents, people are opposed to that, because remember, $60,000 a year is now considered low income. So, if you have working people making $60,000 a year, and I'm stuck on that because you're making, $25 an hour, which once upon a time that wasn't a shabby salary to have, right? And you can't, and you see people like that, they need subsidies to be able to afford their apartments. Well, let's look at what a subsidy looks like. Are real estate taxes a subsidy? If we're going to subsidize housing in New York City so we can maintain our municipal workers, we can't do it with the money that the city brings in, right? We might be able to do something with some tax exemption the state does, but what we really need is participation from the federal government. And it goes back to our representatives and how we interact with the different levels of government, right? What kind of relationships they have, what kind of parties, what is the party affiliation? One of the things I think is really good for Brooklyn was the fact that Chuck Schumer was the minority leader in the Senate and Hakeem Jeffries was the minority leader in the House of Representatives. So they have the ability to do the negotiations because they're at the table. But what about those entities in the middle of the country, again, feeling left behind, or people that are working class communities in Queens like Maspeth? you know.
Master
And if you
quiz,
have
yes.
if you have a trade, because once upon a time there was a large industrial, as a matter of fact, Community Board 8 is working in a large manufacturing district, a light manufacturing district that's being consumed by the Atlantic Avenue mixed use plan. You know, how do we get more housing? How do we get jobs that can sustain a middle class existence, right? For people that don't have college degrees, right? And the requirements for education within education, as you can tell, I can go on and on. So I'm going to shut up for a moment.
I like every minute of it. Every minute of it.
You-
Issues. While I was on the Board of Elections and poll worker, I noticed people coming from Philadelphia, coming from Massachusetts, coming into a Brooklyn location, talking about, can I vote here? Can I participate? Can I sit down and talk with you about my issues in Philadelphia and Massachusetts? We got enough problems as it is. So I understand what you're talking about.
And not only that too, when you talk about it's the absence of civics education. You know, there's so many people that don't understand the process. And I mean, I can say New York State ballots, New York City ballots can be Byzantine, right? Someone basically gave me a hard time because they were at the voting booth and they needed to know how to vote for the proposals that were on the ballot, as well as which judicial candidates, right? And they said, how dare you have this blackout period right at the end of early voting? You need to be on speed dial for everyone that needs to hear it. But if you only have one or two people that know, like, because I offer my opinion, I don't tell them how to vote, right? And their issues is like, hey, you didn't see this bugaboo, this provision would allow this to happen, right? But most people don't know, and even the materials that they come, because the materials that come out from the Board of Elections is very neutral.
Well,
So-
on for nothing. That's what they say.
So there's an organization that's based in Clinton Hill called Public Policy Rising, and their mission for next year is so that people will be able to understand like what the issues are in the ballot, and to understand the civic role. Like some people only save their votes for the big elections. The really important elections are the local elections and the primaries, because the primaries determine who's going to be in the general election. And really understand, have them speak to issues that matter. Not everybody is an expert in everything, but you should have enough versatility or enough contact with other people so that you can reach out to different people that might have the expertise, right? Because you really want to have a well-rounded, well-reasoned point of view. For example, I was chatting with someone before about the merits of a very popular elementary school and another popular elementary school. And when I said that, there's another school that is worth looking at because they offer a international baccalaureate curriculum for elementary school in a traditional public school, because there are too many people that are looking for something else. And when you look at the results don't match up to say that they're so much better against traditional public schools. So really, we're not getting more children, we're dividing our resources. And at the end of the day, are those divided resources going to serve us well?
I'm going to take you back to one of your points. Let's discuss 60,000. Let's discuss young people and youth again. We're at this juncture where you need 3, 4, 5 roommates to just handle any level of apartment. And this is for your youth. We're just going to go with your youth for a second. BNB, the Airbnb. Yes, Airbnb started to give people low-income people who had places to stay, folks who had houses, who didn't necessarily know how to rent out houses, gave them an ability to make money so that they could make their rent and actually turn what little they have into actual income. Wait a minute. We voted against us doing this in New York City and a lot of different city places, but you force people of color to have these buildings, apartments, and things that they can't give over to their families. They can't use to help build income from, but yet you create policies to prevent them from actually building income from what little they have. Okay, now let's go back to you needing 3, 4, 5 roommates. In a lot of these places and buildings with your 3, 4, 5 roommates that you're not actually legally allowed to have because we have policy against that too. Now, all of you who can barely get a job that goes past maybe 15,000, maybe if you maybe get anywhere 20,000, 30,000, you still jockeying enough money together to hold this whatever 2,000, 3,000, 5,000. Now, this is just New York City's example. Let's go to other states that do not give that level of income, but their housing prices are rising too. Now you need both wife, husband to both have 2 working jobs to still not be able to afford the loan to get the house that your grandparents say you should have had ages ago. So now you need 3 more family members to join in to get some money just so you can get this house that everybody keeps saying you should have. Now, you're still not talking about the college debt that you had after you told all the young people, go to college, you're going to have a job by the end of college. There is no jobs by the end of college because a lot of those jobs are elsewhere. We allowed a lot of those employers to say, no, it's cheaper if I put your job over there. Okay, everybody kept saying cheaper, 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 yes, yes, yes. Now there are no jobs. But wait, there's more. In your education system, all of the vocational jobs that you used to train people to learn and know how to do, you took all of that education out the system too, so that people definitely didn't know how to do anything local or anything of foreign or abroad. So now only thing that they have is a piece of paper to say what they learned maybe that was regurgitated for the past 30 years, but the tuition is going up, but the education has stayed the same for the last since 1950, whatever. So make it make sense. Now you're telling young people on top of not giving them any money, not a better job, not a better housing, not better food, because, hey, wait a minute. Did we look at the science? Did you just realize that on your bag of chips, they can now say it's non-GMOs in your chips? There is actually questionable things in your chips because folks are not realizing this math. If I could not tell you that I had to keep it under 10%, that is a governmental sanction. But now that I tell you that something is wrong with your food, I can put whatever in your food now, as long as the percentage is even higher. So whatever you're eating now, you're changing your children. And now you're saying, no, you got to eat this cheap food. You got to eat this food. And they're looking at you like, no, I have to go vegan. I have to do all these things. And you're looking at them like they're crazy because they're like, you don't know. They're changing our food. You recognize that we're having more illnesses now. Even the medical system, we went through a pandemic of a virus that technically wasn't that deadly. Technically, on the scale of not deadly, it is extremely low. But what is deadly is when people don't know how to deal with it. You told all of our doctors throw away all of the tests that would actually find a disease, gave them a test that only does it 50% of the time. Then you got upset that it was killing people more because they didn't know whether you had this, that, or the third. So now if your medical facilities don't know what the hell is going on because they're more about money than anything else. If you're over the age of 65, in New York State, they don't have to care if you live or die, because here's why. Statute of limitation is based off of how long you are going to expect to live past the age of 70. So if you're 65, that you cannot sue them for anything more than anything, because 5 years is only what, maybe 1,000, maybe. So, but we're not asking the questions of why grandma and grandpa don't want to go to the hospital, because they know they're not trying to save their life there. But there are so many things or questions that we're not even trying to protect. Let's talk about food. I'll go back to food for a second. we have more genetic disorders coming out now than ever before. Our grandparents used to say, you could eat beef raw, you could eat this raw, you could do that. And yet for some reason now we're 3-4 times more likely to have age of 30, you having strokes, cancer. Cancer is a common thing. Prostate cancer at the age of 30, like that used to be like you would wait to at least 50. Now 30, you having headaches, you having migraines that are passing. You folks are dying before you're even. This is regular things. We've become comfortable that at the age of whatever. Before if you got shot, you were like, okay, well, you didn't make it past 40. But now if you eat, you can't make it past 40. Now you going outside, we're talking about different kinds of accidents. What are we actually saying here? We've become so okay with not wanting our basic rights that we've become against our actual self-preservation. We've let an entire party dictate money over bodies so consistently that they could walk out on live TV and say, listen, you need money, but it's cheaper if we don't give it to you. And yet it's okay.
So you're going back to issues of policy, right? And it goes back to, we had this election this past month. Earlier in the week, it feels like a lifetime ago, right? And so you look at, we elected a U.S. senator, right? We elected a U.S. senator. We elected our assemblyman and our assembly person and our state Senate representative, and of course the presidential election. So we're looking at very different levels of government. How are we going to interact and what policies? Because with a new election, you always wonder, who's going to head up the FDA? Is this a person who's a vaccine denier? Is this a scientist? What happens to the staff, the professional staff at all of these federal agencies that promulgate policy? Until recently, there was a Supreme Court decision that changed what had been policy from the, I'd say, mid-'80s, in that in agencies, they were the experts on what happened on this, that, or the other, water, food, processes. And now a judge is deemed to have sufficient knowledge to be able to make these decisions. So what are decisions going to be made based upon? Money, expediency, special interest? One of the things that Christian said, and it's related to Airbnb, right? Who advocated for killing Airbnb? Was it a union? What kind of influence would a union have on that? What I'm seeing, because I sit on the Housing and Land Use Committee for Community Board 8, what I'm seeing is the advocacy around new housing is smaller units so that the young people can have a place of their own. But in terms of growing stability, because that implies transients, do we need to make a policy such that we have 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, as well as having smaller apartments? What does that look like? They have something called co-living, which is basically you're paying for your bedroom. You might have a bedroom with a private bath, a common area. Doesn't that sound like dorm living for people that are 40 years old? But that's what affordability is broken out to. And you look at something that is boring or could be boring, zoning. Zoning is actually exciting because it tells you what you can and you can't do, right? And you look at zoning. So are we having zoning that we're going to increase our density to provide more units? Is it matching again? We're creating something. Does it match the need? And who do you rely upon to be able to be your advocate that makes sure that the needs and policy generate a solution that's workable for the community? And that's something that you really need to think about, especially when you're thinking about your local officials, right? Who are going to be at the table for municipal things. And also how your local officials work with the state officials and work with the federal government. Everybody has to play nice in the sandbox to deliver something for the community. And people talk about it in terms of like, oh, there's too much pork in the federal budget. But the quote unquote pork is the money that actually delivers the money to provide a solution at the local level. And people have to understand that. Now, things that I'm really afraid of, we print money and we have this wild inflation, right? And, so I on my way over, I bought a seltzer, I was thirsty. And when I went to the counter to pay for it, they said it's $2, right? I said, funny, the shelf says $1.25, right? So I paid $1.25. One of the people that owned the business went out to check the shelf because ordinarily they charge $3, right? So when you're going out to buy something, right? So if they can sell it for $1.25, right? What kind of margin are they making on $3, right? But just in terms of being able to manage your pocketbook, to budget, the time that you have to put in to be able to bring a balanced budget. Christian and I have actually gone grocery shopping together, and he's asked me questions. I'm very particular about my honey. I need to know what bees. I'm like, never thought about it from that perspective, right? And looking at things from a value proposition, how do you manage to move forward? That's a timely fashion that meets your needs in terms of your pocketbook and your nutrition, and also, who's checking out all of these things? Meat USDA policies. What is high quality meat? What is spoiled? All of these things are up, And then you also have to look at where federal monetary policy is going to be. How do we avoid inflation? The Federal Reserve Bank has been able to act independently of what the presidential policy should be, because their business is what's good for the economy, right?
Mhm.
And they do that by inserting or pulling money out of circulation. And they do it in a bunch of different ways. The purchase or the sale of treasury notes, or the rising and lowering of interest rates, where the Fed rate is the basis for a lot of interest rates, right? So when you have times where you see your credit card rates going up to 28%, you know that the basis of that's a high interest rate. It's not a high Fed funds rate. It's not just the person, oh, well, you must have bad credit. So if it costs a lot to borrow and you have to give money to borrow, how can you save? And especially where you have to save for retirement, because, people talk about the rise and the fall of unions. And it was really interesting in this campaign. You saw unions being lauded, unions coming out and supporting candidates, because unions were a way for people to have that middle class lifestyle post World War II, right? And post World War II, we did not have the worldwide competition that we once did.
Mhm.
Where are we now? And is anybody thinking about the average Jane or Joe?
With it. Now, I'm going to turn attention. Okay. With that, I wanted to push another interesting point you had made earlier. Let's discuss immigration for just a second.
Immigration or migration?
Immigration and migration for just a second. Who stopped Reagan when we had AIDS going crazy, when we had prisons taking us out, when we had drugs, crack cocaine, we have seen documented that crack was actually put into the communities to specifically destroy the communities, because at the end of the 70s was the first time ever the cities was doing better than the suburbs. So in order to balance that out, we had to put the drugs into the cities. Who stopped Reagan when he said, let's take all of the therapy out of the cities. Let's take all of the other jobs out of the cities and just leave guns, alcohol, and police?
It was not so much that they took the jobs out. It was so much that they took the access out. So the access changed in a couple of things. You changed job location, where you located jobs far away from where people lived, right? So you had these insufferable commutes, right? And it wasn't for making, if you're making $200,000, $300,000 a year, you're going to be willing to travel on Metro North, right? To get to wherever it's needed, right? But the other thing that changed was the qualifications for a job. Why does an administrative assistant need a college degree? Because that's a particular kind of, you don't want someone that can't read, right? You don't want someone that can't write. So were those standards raised because the high schools weren't delivering the kind of educational experiences that they needed? If you look at a suburban school district, and I'm going to use Evanston Township in Illinois, for example, they have one high school, Evanston Township. But in that high school, you have trades, right?
Mhm.
You have culinary arts. You
Mhm.
have the college-bound curricula. You have children that learn differently in the same building. And guess what? It's housed in a large building. In New York City, you're seeing a lot of the high schools, the large, proud high schools, being chopped up. Oh, we can't manage them. Really? So you have small schools, you have administrative salaries, right? Dollars for school follow the students. So what are we really accomplishing? We have smaller schools. New York City was chasing the fad, the small school idea, and not looking at what you needed to be able to provide. What the citizenry to move the city forward. You need to have, my opinion, you need to have well-educated people at all stratas of life, and you can see there's this kid that I put bad in front of his name because he was that much trouble, and I'm leaving out a word, right? And he went to a school that provided very good, solid education. Well, when he decided he didn't want to be a bad kid anymore, he had the skills that he could get a civil service job.
Mhm.
And then he went to college and he found a vocation. The man now has a doctorate, right? But if you don't have that basic sound education and you show that value, and there is opportunity, because the absence of opportunity, especially how you cluster disadvantage. When you look in Brooklyn, and there are 2 zip codes that provide the largest number of people to the state prison system. And what do they have in common? They have poor schools, and it continues. So if you're not well educated, you're not going to have the tools by which you can get a job, right? Get a job. And it may or may not pay well, but at least you can earn your keep and you're contributing to the tax base. But what are you able to access resources? We have something in the city that allows you to have a half price Metro card. I have a friend whose salary is $26,000 a year. She makes too much money to be qualified for the half price program. So when you look at the fare
Can't
at
make
$2,
this up.
and it might be 27. Her income's about 2,300. My math is bad. $2,300 a month. But when you think about what you have to pay for rent, she could easily spend half of her paycheck, more than half of her paycheck, for shelter. Then you have all of the expenses. Plus, if this is someone who went to college, it's highly likely that they have the student debt. And it just goes on. Why are you living in New York City when you can't advantage any things like sporting games, the theater, or even going to the museum costs money. So, how do you balance that?
Taking it further, again, you brought us to our youth. Like, you keep saying that they should be working, they should have this. That's just how rent. We're not talking about insurance.
Nope, definitely.
Health insurance by itself. We were like, yes, fortunately, the new healthcare system allowed to be a part of your families a little longer, so that you can get past 26, maybe.
But at the federal level, the Affordable Care Act is in jeopardy. And and again, that's federal policy. And when you think about it too, because I remember being, I got kicked off of my parents' insurance when I graduated from college, right? 22 years old. And you're young, and a lot of people feel like you're young and invincible, right? But if you don't take care of your health early on in the game, you're going to pay for it later, right?
Yeah.
Your insurance is at its all-time highest when you're young. That goes for car insurance, a car note. Now you have to have housing and renters insurance if you live in the different apartments. So, but now they can put that rate up there as high as possible because you're young. Your job should be able to carry some of these costs. Wait.
Is it the job's responsibility, or is it the community's responsibility? Because is a job, is an employer, is that their responsibility, or is it a perk? Notice what I'm saying. A perk to offer health insurance, vision insurance,
Where you live.
dental
It's
insurance.
about where
Wait,
you live.
a 401k. Because I talked about the municipal workers before. Many municipal workers endure a smaller salary than their peers in private industry, but what do they have at the end of the day? A pension, right? And there are people like, I know people that are retired school teachers that every now and again, New York City Teachers Retirement will call them. You still alive? You know, because you're 90 years old, you've been collecting this money for how long? Are you still here? And right? I'm
Are
not joking,
you still
right?
here? And because of those benefits, all other underneath that generation do not get any of those benefits.
And here's the point: if you have a subsistence living, right? Do you have the money for a 401k? I know very few people that have average jobs that have hit that number, right? And they say the magic number is $1 million in savings, right? So that would allow you, right? To withdraw $40,000 a year or $50,000 a year, right? Presuming that you don't live forever, because people are now afraid that they're going to outlive their savings, really, right? And then when you talk again federal policy, because we started this conversation of consequences of the election, what's going to happen to Social Security? What's going to happen to Medicare? When can you retire, right? So all of that affects your ability and there's a certain amount of mental anguish, when you're always scrubbing and you don't feel like you're going to get ahead, right? And that's something Melissa was saying before. It's like, it's like, I'm falling behind. How is this possible? I've done everything that I'm supposed to do, and I can't access these things.
Access, opportunity.
But talk about immigration and migration.
We're going to pull it back a little bit. Did we stop Reagan from allowing, was it the CIA at the time, specifically, which has been documented now, to put the drugs in the South America, Central America, destroying their communities with gun trade and the drug trade? Did we stop it from happening for the last 50 years going on practically? Now we're upset that those written locations now that have been basically destroyed because of the money you made in America, the US of A, because there's all of Canada is included, Mexico's included in the idea of America. But in the US of A, you made trillions of dollars off of those people losing their land, their communities. Now those people's children have come to your land to demand what you stole from them. But here's the difference between the people coming now versus the people you robbed 400 years ago. The people coming now have more of a feeling that they can get something back in return. You've convinced the people 400 years ago that their children now that they can't get it, they won't get it. We've been with you for so long, you're not going to give it. You can't ask for reparations from somebody when you've been that close to somebody for this long and they still haven't got it. That's not even a thought for the people you've robbed already. But for the people who are coming up now, the younger generations, for those who are coming from other countries now, they want. And I'm not mad for them wanting.
But do we have to give them what they want? Or do they make the sacrifices that are for our forefathers, no matter what condition of servitude? We all know the washerwoman that was able to save her quarters, right? So that she would be able to provide a college scholarship for students like herself, right? And, so there's thrift, there's wit, there's creativity, there's hard work, right? So, and politically, when we had the Cuban migration after Castro, right? People call it La Ayuda. They land in the United States and they're going to get help. Who helps those who have been here? That's a question.
Here's where that argument becomes very red. Our white male constituency says the same thing about every other one who is not white male. They can say, my grandparents did that to you. I did not do that to you. So why are you asking to work for my same wage? Why are you asking to take my job when it was, you're asking me to give you something I don't have. Now their children of today, white male children of today, are trying to understand, where is the disconnect from my grandfather to my father to me. I can't even afford. I am just like every other member who you have basically denied up until this point. This is why we have an opportunity to actually have a level of unification that we haven't seen in decades, and yet we have missed the ball in such levels. The children are all suffering together. It is not a Black thing. It is not a white thing, Asian thing. All youth cannot afford to live. Period. You have white youth coming in, shacking up with your Black youth, Asian youth, just to be here in the cities because their families, who Lord knows where, if they went back home, they wouldn't know where they would be. Because at the end of the day, red has made the compass so far from able to touch or reach that everybody across the board is concerned. And we're sitting here and we're like, why are we losing? But we're not losing. The Republicans have specifically said this is a 40 to 60 year plan that we are at the end of. It has been in every single news station since Trump's inception. Only difference is they did not have a figurehead that could carry the message. Wait, they did not have a figurehead that could carry the message. You had Bush bankrupt half the world by himself as a Republican president, and America had amnesia.
Which Bush? Bush 1 or Bush 2?
Bush 2 bankrupt half of the world, that most other countries can't even trust America, and those are our allies. Come on now, where are we?
But it goes back to policy. It goes back to policy, and you think about IMF policy, right? What happens? How does a quote unquote third world country access capital? And it's the same thing. How do we access capital that's going to benefit young people, right? How do we impact policy? Because one of the things, Melissa and I had a couple of conversations before we all got started, right? People that make policy based upon theory, make policy again about, through the demographics, through the statistics, but they very rarely make policy by dealing with the people that are directly affected by those decisions. There's no such thing as a decision being made that there's no consequence, right? Good outcome, bad outcome, doubtful outcome. And the thing is how do you deliver that? And that's, one of the reasons why people were really focused about the presidential election. Who's going to look at the outcome that will best match my circumstance? I need to be elevated. I feel like I'm ignored. I'm going to vote for the Republican Party, right? Because the Democrats don't hear our cry. They talk about, they're now saying that the Democrats are the party of the elite, but are we really? Yeah, I'm asking.
I'm
asking.
No, there was Oprah, there was, who came out at the concerts. There was Oprah, there was Usher, there was Beyonce, there was Cardi B, there was Taylor Swift, all, the Obamas, who else? Julia Roberts, all these Hollywood celebrities where the average American can't feel like they don't relate to them. How they don't have to worry about, are they living in safe neighborhoods? They don't have to worry about the cost of eggs. They don't have to worry about the price of gasoline. They don't like it. If they don't like it in America, they have a home in France. They have a home in London. They can leave. They could change their circumstances. And it's not, I think people just felt like, who's coming out to represent Vice President Harris does not represent us. The people that are telling us to vote for Vice President Harris do not represent us. And I think there's a lot of people that felt like this is not, I don't care, like the issue also, they say the Democrats have lost the way. A lot of Americans, like, they're tired of, all this, transgender in sports, boys playing, in girl sports because they identify as a girl, use of boys using the girls' bathroom because now they identify as a girl. Tampons in the boys' bathroom when boys obviously have no need for tampons. That things were becoming more like this is not their world. For most of America, outside of New York, outside of California, these aren't their issues. Their issues are we just want to live. We want to be able to have our steak in our town and be able to put food on the table, be able to, treat my family to a vacation, to a movie night, and just live. And, I think a lot of people were sick of being told by the Democratic Party, like what to think, what to feel, how to vote, instead of giving solutions to these problems. And I think that really was like a reason why a lot of people, deserted the party. That people don't just think that we've become so far removed that the Democratic Party used to be the party of free speech, used to be the party of ideas, used to be the party of the common man. And now it's more like, well, I feel like the Republicans are more inclusive. You have Democrats, you have independents, you don't have that celebrity veneer, that superficiality that was at almost every single rally that Kamala Harris had. The concerts, it was people singing to you, it was entertainment, it wasn't meat and potatoes. Like, what can you do for us? I'm suffering, and Americans are suffering. We may not be suffering, we are the coastal elites because we fly over the rest of the country to get to, let's say, California, to the other elite states. But there's a whole other America out there, and people are just not happy. There's a lot of angst out there, and they're looking for help. They're looking for answers. Their mayors weren't helping them. Their local council members weren't helping them. Like when you hear stories about these towns that had, Haitians dumped in, and they're going to their city councils like, we need help. All the offices that we go to is just packed. There's not enough infrastructure. We're already a failing town. Like Springfield used to be a big manufacturing town, and it lost a lot, like a lot of the towns in Ohio. Ohio's not like the manufacturing, cap center anymore. So you're putting in a new demographic into an already ailing town, and and they're crying. They're saying we can't get to the welfare offices, we can't get to the hospitals, we can't do this, we can't do that, and people are just being ignored. I mean, it was ignored until J.D. Vance had said, until Trump had said about the cats. No one spoke about Springfield. Then all of a sudden, people were like, "What the hell is going on in Springfield?" And still, it was not addressed by the vice president. Like, what is going on? Please explain to us how whatever amount of Haitians came in. Can you explain to us how they got here, why they got here, not just throw them into town? And there's a lot of documentaries on YouTube about local residents saying, like, this is what's going on, and we have no explanation. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why Trump won, because people are saying, what's going on, and no one was getting answers. They were just getting, scolding from Oprah, scolding from Julia Roberts, no answers from anyone in government. And I feel the same way. The government has not answered for anything. They've totally gaslighted this whole country, like about the border. What's going on? And there's no problem. There's no problem. Well, how is there no problem when there's 200,000 migrants in New York City, when there's X amount in Colorado, Denver had to file bankruptcy? How is there not a problem? And no one has addressed it. And I think it gets to the point where enough already, enough.
What's going on?
Exactly.
What's going on?
I'm sorry.
Good.
Go ahead.
What's going on? The issue of what is going on in this country. What's going on in Brooklyn?
I
They're putting
agree.
out lithium battery islands, which will blow up if they get too powerful, and they're needed for those wind turbines.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Down in Red Hook,
Oh, okay.
Williamsburg, Bay Ridge, Wallabout Bay, near the Navy Yard. They blow up, and you have to make a 1 mile radius.
Oh my God.
Everybody has to get out of within that 1 mile radius. That's what's going on now.
Why aren't our council members
No
discussing
one seems
this?
to say a thing. I've been boycotting this and complaining about that, but it's not even on the ballot. It's not even on the minds of the politician. Each politician spoke, but not about what is going on with BOMA. It's in Mexico. New Mexico City did try it out, and they're trying their best to get rid of it now. But
What
it
is
is
BOMA? Tell everybody what is BOMA.
the Bureau of Environmental Management, and they're a big organization with seafarers, and they ask you to give me your opinion, and when you give their opinion, it's washed away. It's washed away.
So
And
opinion also, follows with policy. Do we have enough patience to gather the information to be able to form policy to implement it? Is it going to be successful, or is it going to? They really don't know what our needs are. We need a solution now. Can we wait for that solution? Is it the perfect solution? Is it a solution that's half bad? Is it a solution that's implemented in terms of policy in stages? Will people deny the policy because, it doesn't meet their needs right?
Is, again, you've mentioned policy. Policy is very interesting because even what my lady Melissa was saying, policy is what allowed businesses to put whatever they want to in food. Republican policy specifically. Policy is what allowed for most businesses to move jobs over the seas.
Mm-hmm.
Republican policy. Policy is what keeps a state like Kentucky as being almost dead last, even though there have been the majority leader since for the last 30, he's been one of the leaders. Whether he's been majority or minority leader, he's been there for the last 30 years. And yet Kentucky is still dead last. And they've been a Republican state since we can't even remember. So policy is a very unique thing when we sit there and we discuss what people will or will not do in places like Michigan, when same policy kept us from fixing their water supply system. Again, red policy. Policy is what kind we try to use to protect those like in Alaska from mowing down half of their forests to give an oil pipeline that Republicans want since policy is very interesting when you say the food that we have eaten has given an uprise to transgender, in that it has affected chemically the systems of more people within the last 30 years because of how we've changed food to make it cheaper. Policy has created more genetic disorders. We've made it easy for people. Policy in our medical system, red policy allows us to use, law and not medical. Law, because as long as you stay within the right statutes, it doesn't matter if I have to save your life or not. That is policy.
So here's the thing. So again, fundamentally, are we voting against our interests if we don't get the right policies that meet our needs? Or how do we vote so that we will get policy promulgated that will meet our needs? And who says whose needs takes precedence in whatever happens, right? So, some of the things you've said, Airbnb was definitely policy related to unions. A union didn't want to be subsumed, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at real estate policy in New York City, or the effects of real estate laws, policies, and practices has it created more housing or has it created the right housing? Who's at the table making decisions? Oftentimes, you don't see a tenant, you don't see a senior homeowner, you don't see a young homeowner, because one of the challenges that we're having is the transfer of wealth. You know, mom may have been able to afford it because she had her pension, she had her savings, she had her social security. But a younger ear, will they have access to any of those streams of income to be able to support something like that? Because achievement in school really starts in having stability. That's a stable place to live. That's having food on a regular basis. That's having access to decent schools, because decent schools will have good teachers. It only takes one teacher to spark a child to move forward, and they will be able to mentor that child to whatever they should fulfill. Because you and I both know a teacher, an educator, retired educator, 43 years, right? And I remember at her retirement party, we were brought to tears because she had taught so long, there were decades. But her children, her students of the 90s, bought a Pandora bracelet, and each year put a charm in the bracelet and spoke about how she had influenced their lives, right? The impact, spending the extra time for cultural programs, pulling a child into a special program where she could be supported, supporting a child who had an abusive home life, right? Garnering those resources outside of what school allows you to do, but understanding this was what was needed to do. And those are the kinds of influences, having that experience. How do you, form policy? We can talk about schools. We can talk about opportunity. The opportunity that was missing in those two communities that I was talking about, jobs were not there. And when you substitute manufacturing jobs for retail jobs, right, you're not making the same kind of money. And when you talk about staffing policy, a lot of retail now is at will. Come in if we need you, but you can't plan a schedule, right? And that's well, I'm going to say work from home is a boon, right? But because you don't have to spend the money on commuting.
Yes.
You don't have to spend the money on, this is one of the things that we learned in the pandemic.
What are you doing at home? You could be doing something altogether different than what's needed in the office.
As long as you produce the product that's needed, what's the difference?
Not at home. No.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. It never has been a time when I've called someone at home that they have been prepared. They're always talking about their children, their dog.
See, you're going to have, because I know during the pandemic, one of my nephew would be like, Auntie Sharon's on a Zoom call. No fear. He literally no fear Zoom, no fear Zoom. As Zoom became more normal, he would wave and go off screen to ask a question. Okay, so there's the adaptability. But what is the difference from having a computer at home and a phone at home from having a computer in the office, right? If you have a work product to produce,
Hands-on is always much better.
I think we're having a generational difference here.
It's very interesting that you're saying a lot of this because there's no commute. Like now you're getting more people working longer hours because there's no commute. Now, because there's no commute, that level of rest that you would need, you actually can or cannot gain. There are so many extra benefits to not being there. The only downside is the social aspect of being in a workspace. Everything else about actually being able, you're not providing childcare. That's another one of those things that you want young people to have children, but you're not providing childcare for. You're not giving moms more than 3 weeks maybe to actually have their baby long enough for them to walk away from their child. But somehow they need to figure out how to juggle your job, the home job, and whatever else they have to do. You're not giving dads the opportunity to have 3 weeks so that mom can go back to work and do what she was doing.
Whereas I used to have 3 jobs in each generation that passed. 70s, 80s, 90s, and the 2000. I had 3 jobs each generation, 10-year stints of each job. That gave me muscle. That going to work gave me muscle. If I was home, I lay back. No, I couldn't do that. I had to go to work and make sure I gained these muscles and strength and this skill of drafting and architectural work. It is essential. Don't lose that skill, whatever you do.
It's not so much as skill, habit, work performance. How do you show up to work? And the thing is, when you look at something like, again, commuting, just taking that off of your plate, the great thing about the pandemic for me was that I realized what a hamster wheel I had been on. Yeah. And then now it required a quality of life for myself that I was sacrificing relationships, right? And you have to really have conversations about what is my priority, right?
Always these conversations that we're having. I'm going to bring us back to Melissa's other point. Now, we mentioned Oprah. We mentioned Beyonce. We mentioned a lot of stars, but who pays stars checks?
We do.
Now, wait a minute. No. Let's talk about this because we like to see the basketball players and we say basketball players have a lot of money. No, the guy who pays the basketball player has a lot of money, not the basketball player. The basketball player is still a civil servant. Oh, a servant, I'm sorry.
An at-will employee.
An at-will employee. We're not looking at the red that's behind the person who got the money in blue. We're not looking at those who are actually so far removed from your own values that they would actually they have borrowed from their own grandchildren. Their own grandchildren cannot afford to live to this day. And we're sitting here and saying, how red can we become? Understand, we're saying we're not, it is bigger. It is the situation is so far removed that people who are in power do not want to die. And it's not, I guess it's almost rude to say in that way, but retirement age has now been pushed back to 75, going to 80.
Don't forget the baby boomers.
What are we can't afford to retire now. I mean, come on. Let's talk. If you can't afford to retire, you can't give your job away to anyone coming underneath you because you can't afford to. Okay. If you're now fighting the generations underneath you for the same bit of food that was given to you when you were a little younger in their same age, what chance do they have when they get older?
But see, what happens is because people get frustrated with corporate life, right? And they start their own businesses, right? And so, again, going back to policy, because policy is promulgated by politics, right? And so how do they have access to capital for their businesses? How are they taxed? How are they allowed to form? There was a big thing in New York City, City of Yes, right? City of Yes for economic opportunity. And one of the things was to allow businesses in residences, because there's a separation between commercial and residential, and an apartment building. So can I have a business in my apartment building or my co-op building where people are working through my building? I don't know who they are, right? So where do you find that space? Is it the co-working space? And they tried the co-working model, right? Especially in commercial buildings that were not being Class B, so they weren't the most effective ones in terms of modern communications, technology, and amenities, right? So those Class B buildings got turned into co-working spaces, and we saw one company that was predominant in New York, WeWork, blow up. So what do we still do with that,
How can we, at this point, it has to be radical. I'm sorry, but I have to be.
How radical is radical and what is radical?
I have to be radical. You don't care. You don't care about social values. You don't care.
Is that possible in a society not to care about social values?
It is, because if you care about it, if a business is a person, and if we care about more businesses than people, then we would care about you as an entity a mass and not necessarily as an individual. And because we don't care about you as an individual, I don't have to give you any perks. I don't have to give you benefits. I don't have to make sure you survive past the age of. I don't have to care you actually have a place to stay. I don't have to care if you get a bank account. I don't have to care anything past, oh, wait, we're so worried about whether you're going to get aborted or not, and not about when you actually are in physical terra firma on the ground. We're so busy worried about you getting on the ground and not actually taking care of you once you hit the ground. So my values have been so far removed that now what is it that we care about? What is it that is so... Because actually, as of right now, what I have heard, there is actually nothing. We don't care about the future because climate has come, environmental issues. We don't care about the water pollution and plastic. We don't care about the kids. Because now we have to make it make sense. Because right now you have so many disenfranchised youth that you're hitting that Bible territory.
I don't even think it's just disenfranchised youth. I think it's disenfranchised families, you know? So, I mean, you know, you talk about, because, you know, you walk in this world, you know, with a particular set of beliefs, right? And then you see someone ascend leadership that doesn't appear to have a moral compass. I mean, you know, part of, you know, religion, Buddhist, Judaism, Christianity, right? And you see them misuse, especially Christianity, because now we have this movement for Christian nationalism, right? This is not a Christian country.
Ooh.
So, you know, at the outset, because remember, there is no state religion in the United States, right? So from the very beginning, we knew we had to deal with others. So who are you to tell the other person that your values, your core beliefs are invaluable? And just to be able to say that we are going to ban Muslims, on what basis? On what basis? You know?
We have so many non-Christian Christians trying to control the country that it is so foreign for them to even have a moral compass. So many Christians, but everybody has these words called Christian, and yet very few are carrying any Christian value.
So if Christian, because you have to remember the founders of the country were Christian, right? And this organization was to be believed. We do not want to have a fealty to a monarch, right? But we want to have a fealty to democracy. And Chuck Schumer often quotes Benjamin Franklin. What are you trying to create in that room? The room where it happened, where the Constitution was formed? We are trying to form a democracy. The challenge is for you to keep it. How do we keep it? Is it, you know, Melissa and I were talking about how we became active in our communities, right? What do you do? Who do you talk to? What is right for me? Because it's not going to be right for everybody. You know, some people don't have an issue with someone who's transgender. A lot of people say transgendered persons offend them because the Bible, right?
Yes.
People selectively use the Bible. You'll quote one verse in Leviticus and ignore the other verse in Leviticus, right? Do we own our fealty, or is it the way we treat one another and we follow the 10 Commandments? You know, most of the major religions in the United States are Abrahamic religions, right? Judaism, Christianity, and being a Muslim, right? And so what are our core values? Are our core values being reflected in our policies? I say it's sort of a winner take all mentality. There's more pie for me and less for you. Oh, well.
Yes. All right. Got to hand it back to him. Thank you, host. You putting us on there in the hot seat.
Thank you so much for all of you Brooklyniters. You gave us stuff that we needed to hear. And Brooklyn is in the house. Kings County is in the house. Thank you for sharing with us, because we need it. We need it. You really unpacked the election. You unpacked our society. You are the stars of this podcast. Thank you both. All of you, excuse me.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
And I
Thank
want
you.
to thank Salon Lee Hing for allowing us to be hosted by Salon Lee Hing. Family, 732 Washington Avenue. Brooklyn is in the house. 732. You have professionals, barbers. Please come out. If you're looking for a haircut, if you're looking for a stylist that's professional, and if you're looking for the atmosphere that is phenomenal, come on out to Salon Lee Hing. 718-230-4100. Give them a call. Tell them Duke sent you. All right? Duke sent you. All right. God bless you, family. Take care. Love you all.
Thank you.
Well, I think
Yeah.
we should all talk